very warm welcome to all of our attendees, especially on such a cold morning. Up in Joburg, it's pretty cold. I know down in Cape Town, they're saying it's pretty cold too. So wherever you're coming from, I hope that the weather brightens up during the rest of the day and the week, and we really look forward to this Toolbox talk this morning. Today we are discussing training and why training is so important. But first we need to understand what is training and what is the purpose of us achieving a good training program within occupational health and safety management systems. Coming up for the rest of the month though, we are going to be looking at employers and your responsibilities in terms of the OSH Act. We'll look at victimization, what is the issue with that. Then the hazardous chemical substance section, we are going to discuss cement, and then finally we end off with do's and don'ts of PPE. So if you have any questions or you would like to see a different topic on one of these Toolbox talks, please reach out to us. You can drop us a mail at safety@iopsa.org or info@ohss.co.za, and we'll make sure that we try and really align these Toolbox talk topics to what you want to hear out in the industry. But let's get right into our Toolbox talk for this morning. Training. Why is training so important, and why do we actually need to do training? Well, the definition of training is an action of teaching a person a particular skill or type of behavior. Now, this is extremely important because you'll notice that teaching someone a skill does not necessarily mean just the theoretical part, but it also has a practical component to a skill. So if you need to become a skilled craftsman, a skilled plumber, there's not only a theoretical course that you need to go on, understanding the SANS codes, the laws behind installations, manufacturers' guidelines, but you also have that practical element, which helps you to go from not just a good plumber, but a great plumber, one that knows not just the theoretical side, but understands the application of that knowledge. And this is helping you to really achieve a behavior. Now, behavior is something where it becomes second nature to you. When you wake up in the morning, for most of us, we get up and we have a bit of a routine. It's not really something that you have to think about. You've got a routine. It's based on months and years of practice or whatever it is that you were doing. For instance, if you had to drive a vehicle to and from work, when you get into that vehicle, do you have to think of pressing in your clutch, putting the car into gear, reversing out of the driveway, or is it just an action that almost becomes natural? Yes, we still have to have that element of watchfulness and vigilance while driving, to take a look at the hazards around us. But essentially, the actions that you are taking, the body movements, the theoretical and the practical, become a behavior. A good behavior in training or teaching somebody to have a skill or to develop a skill would be to obviously have somebody that not only wants to be trained, but understands the general or basic elementary functions of what they are going to be performing. And this helps both the teacher and the student to really find not just common ground, but to find the weaknesses and the strengths, and to then improve on those weaknesses and reinforce the strengths of that student. Now, how do you go about doing this in occupational health and safety? Well, we'll give you a few tips. But first, as we mentioned in the beginning, we need to understand why we are wanting to do this. What are you really trying to achieve? What is the purpose of your health and safety training? Well, really, it's to achieve competence, isn't it? Many of us send our students out, or our employees rather, out to go to a company to be trained. Sometimes, as plumbers, you've come to us to do some of your training, and you expect to get trained and to get a certificate of competence after that course. And yes, that is showing that you have the necessary ability, knowledge, or skill to do something successfully. For instance, our firefighting course and our occupational health and safety representative course that we are doing, you get the training theoretically, we help you with certain practical aspects, and then you expect to get a certificate. However, a certificate does not necessarily mean that we are 100% competent. It means competency based on achieving the outcomes of a course, sitting in class for an hour, doing the test, and achieving a certain percentage. But now we want to take a look at something a little bit more pivotal to the actual training component. To understand why something is important, we need to understand this purpose. Training helps to ensure you and your employees are not injured or made ill by the work that you do. And we know that there is a high possibility of being injured in the plumbing industry. We are working with biological hazards all the time, whether in sewers, in drainage pipes. There are often elements where there is the potential to get hurt and injured, and there is the potential to have some sort of illness related to the actual task that we're performing. So that is one element that we want to achieve with training. The second is to develop a positive health and safety culture, bringing in this behavior where safety and health becomes second nature. So that's like those few things of driving a car. You know the basics. Yes, you still have to be vigilant. You still need to look out for stop streets and robots, but really the act of driving that vehicle becomes easy. It becomes second nature. And this is what we want to do. We want to drive our health and safety system, and certain things must almost become not perfunctory, but it becomes a behavioral based system. So really we've got that culture of health and safety. And then we still watch out for the risks and hazards as we are moving forward with this health and safety system. Then the third thing is to find out how you, as a company, not just as an employer, so employees who are out there listening in, please remember, it's not just the responsibility of your employer or your boss to have all the health and safety in place. It's also your responsibility. But bosses, employers out there, please note it's also not just the employee's responsibility. It's a team effort. We need to work together to manage health and safety better. Then finally, what training does is it helps you to meet your legal duty to protect the health and safety, not just of yourself as an employee, but as employers to protect your employees. So really, we now understand what we want to achieve from health and safety training or a training program within our organization. So let's go through these four sections once again and just try and really focus on why we should have a training management plan. Again, it is to avoid injury and illness. Now, we can take an example from COVID-19. There is so much information out there about COVID-19. And yes, it becomes a criminal offense to put any incorrect information out there. So if anybody's promoting incorrect information about COVID-19, people get involved, especially the government, and they're starting to really try and get people not to have fake news because it costs people their lives. Now, I'd love to have that same momentum with health and safety, because in health and safety, there are certain aspects of your task that could affect your health and your safety, which essentially means your life. So fake news or not having a correct training program is just as essential as making sure we have these COVID-19 protocols. So let's take this as an example and use it as just a basic policy or a principle to push us forward in seeing what next steps can we take to avoid injury and illness by having a proper training management plan. So with all this information that is so widely accessible, we've got a good founding for explaining to employees what they need to do. And it almost becomes a culture. It becomes a behaved or behavior or a learned behavior, because you know what COVID-19 is. But not only do you know it, you understand that it spreads from one person to the next, whether airborne particles from a person's breathing out or from touching surfaces that might have the bacterial virus attached to it. So now that you understand that, you also know and understand why you have to wear a mask. You then also know and understand why you should wash your hands or use hand sanitizer. So we need to take the same principle of how we've learned and come to understand and lived with COVID-19 by training our employees on the health and safety aspects using these same principles. Imparting knowledge to someone is very important. Upskilling people with knowledge is a vital component of not only continuing your name brand in an industry where someone can take over from you in your company, but what it essentially does is it helps someone to have knowledge of your business so that they can continue performing the tasks of that business. But without the practical element or the guidance and experience, that knowledge almost becomes in itself non-essential, because having that knowledge, like we've seen on Google, thousands of terabytes of information, but where is the practical application? Well, that comes from, as we mentioned earlier, years of experience, on-site experience and training. And this is where you as plumbers out in the industry have learned specific skills, and it has become a behavior. But within just a few months, we have learned how to deal with COVID-19 based on our own acceptance of what is out there, but also on how we view health and safety of ourselves and our families. So again, let's take the same principle and push it in to health and safety. Let it become a culture, a learned behavior. We know that we need to wash our hands before we eat. Is this something that needs to be taught you every day? What about washing your hands after using the toilet? Well, again, another very basic, elementary training that is drummed into us from children. What about as we grow older, we realize keeping our body clean to prevent illness? As infants, our parents bathed us, but as we get older, we started understanding not just that we have to do it, but why we have to do it. And then if you started owning your own home or get a lot of chores from your parents, well, then cleaning our homes to prevent the buildup of bacteria, viruses, and to keep our entire homes clean. And that protects ourselves and our families. Now, the same principles then apply to health and safety. These are basic fundamentals. It's things that, yes, they are chores, but they are necessary in order to protect us from specific risks, such as getting sick or creating a hazard around the house where somebody else can get injured. Cleaning up after ourselves prevents us from slipping or tripping over things. We do this often when our children are playing and we require them to pack their not their tools, their toys away so that we do not trip or slip over them or step on them. Well, isn't this the same when we are on site? As plumbers, you are out there using a lot of tools and equipment, and if these are laying around, well, essentially you're going to have a supervisor acting as a parent. And this is really not what we want, because that means you are being treated like a child. So how do we take this health and safety culture with fundamental elements that we have been trained up with from youth to really make it a safety culture within our organization? Well, we need to manage health and safety, and we need to do it as a team. Training helps you as employers and employees to be on the same level of understanding. You see, training, not just imparting knowledge, we know that we need to wash our hands, and we know that we need to wash our bodies. We know we need to eat to keep healthy, but we also need to know why. And then we also need to know what are the consequences of not doing those things. So again, using COVID-19 as an example, if you do not wash your hands after going out, there is the possibility that you touched a contaminated surface. If you touched a contaminated surface, you might be contaminated yourself, or you may go home and contaminate surfaces at home, thereby putting your family at risk. So we don't just know why we need to wash our hands, we understand the consequences of not doing something, that it could affect and have a domino effect against our family or those who we love. So this type of training, now helps us to develop a behavior. It becomes easier for us to not just wash our hands, but to have the understanding that I want to wash my hands because I want to keep myself safe. And I also want to keep my family safe. This same pattern can then be used on site. Because when we manage health and safety together through a good training plan, and this training is not just sending them out on courses that we provide, it's internal training. Every day there becomes some sort of learned behavior when on site, and we learn by example. Very much like kids, children basically imitate their parents. So you've heard the old adage, do as I say, not as I do. Well, this cannot happen in health and safety. It is do as I do because I am leading health and safety. And this is where managers and supervisors become such a pivotal part of the training system. So it allows for more involvement, not just from employees, but also from employers. And then they know how things are supposed to be executed. But what they can also do is be more productive. You see, when health and safety is in place and it becomes a learned behavior, it's not something that is difficult for you to do. It is something that becomes almost learned, but at the same time, it becomes basic or elemental. You know that you wash your hands before you eat. You know that you do a DSTI before you start working. You realize that you keep your home clean. You understand that housekeeping is important on site. You know that you need to go for checkups for you and your family. Well, we do the same in medical surveillance. All of these items basically are essential parts of living. Now, this can be applied to our occupational health and safety system as well, and especially based on the training management plan. So when employees know and understand how to keep themselves safe and why they need to become safe, again, this production or productivity is increased, and you will have less downtime due to accidents. And incidents and accidents cost us money. They cost us money and they cost us time. So what we are essentially saying is if your system, yes, it takes time and a little bit of effort in the beginning, but once it becomes that pattern of behavior, you will realize very quickly how health and safety actually costs you less in the long run, less on downtime and less on payments for incidents and accidents. Finally, it also helps you to conform to not only the OSH Act and the 21 regulations, but it helps you then to be compliant in your legal duty. As a employer, and we will see this next week, as an employer, according to Section 8, there are certain duties that you need to carry out, one of them being training. But as an employee, under Section 14, it discusses duties of employees and the fact that your training must be put into practice. So yes, having a certificate is great, but we need to take that information, take that knowledge, and put it into application when we are on site. So each section of the legislation outlines certain requirements that you need to be performed, and we will continue this discussion next week when we then focus on employers, and we want to focus on you first as an employer because really it comes from you. You are the one that drives it as a leader in your organization, and then we slowly start filtering it down in the next few months to employees, and then we'll also touch base on training coordinators, evacuation coordinators and such, especially within the health and safety context. But can you take this knowledge, add understanding and behavioral changes to it? This is really where we want you to go in the next few months. So let's start off 2021 having a full management plan in place with a training needs analysis already done, knowing where our future is going. So if you don't have something in place now, don't worry. Take the time, put in a little bit of effort, and start with the first step. What is the first step? Well, perhaps you need to get help with that. Perhaps you need to take a look at your risk assessment and decide where your training needs to be focused around. For those of you who are doing construction work, out in the plumbing industry, maybe your focus around training will be around construction related activities. Perhaps you are only on maintenance. So you go to private homes maintaining plumbing. Well, then maybe you can look at the elements of maintenance around health and safety and just task specific risk assessments instead of environmental or site specific ones like construction. Perhaps you're just auditing. You're going out to audit whether installations are done properly. Well, then maybe you're going to look at that facet from communicating with other plumbers out in the industry, others out that might affect your safety and health while on site. As we've mentioned before in previous Toolbox talks, the setting up of ladders on site, the climbing into ceilings on site, all of that affects you as an auditor. And then for all of us, just general health and safety would be an applicable point, no matter what industry you're in. And we know many of you in the audience are not plumbers. You coming to us from different industries, perhaps even health and safety professionals as well. And if you want to weigh in your opinion, or perhaps give us advice on how you feel training systems should be designed, please give us that information. We really appreciate your feedback, your comments, even criticism that comes through. We really value what you say out in the industry, and that is what shapes the topics of these Toolbox talks. So let's finish off with telling you about the Iopsa sponsored training. We thank you very much for joining our Toolbox talk this morning. But if you are an Iopsa member, please don't forget you do have the describe the functions of a health and safety representative, commonly known as a SHE-Rep, according to section 17 of the OSH Act. So if you need a SHE-Rep, please make sure that you book this training. We are doing a national trip for September. September is a safety month where we are going to be driving from KZN, firstly in Joburg, KZN, Eastern Cape, Western Cape, and then back up through the Cape all the way back through to Joburg. And we are on a national quest to find and speak to as many as possible out in the industry. So if you need to do this training, you are allowed to send 2 employees free of charge if you are an Iopsa member. If you're not an Iopsa member and you want to join these classes that we are doing in and around South Africa, please reach out to us as well, because we do have discounted rates for those who are not Iopsa members. And then for those who are taking advantage of the firefighting course that we are doing, that comes with that free fire out extinguisher for each person that is actually sent on the course. So for the month of September, that is the training promotion that we are giving nationally. We are going to be out in KZN next week for the entire week, doing a few courses out there. I'll be there myself as well to meet and greet many of you out in the industry. We really want to try and chat to you as much as possible. And then we're taking a look at Eastern Cape from the 14th to the 18th. That particularly we are based in East London, but we'll be in and around that area. And then we are going to various places within the Western Cape. Now, it is from the 21st to the 25th. Those are when a lot of our courses are booked. But in between these dates, we are obviously in a few more places. So if you are in an area and you have enough people to allow us to come out to you, enough people being a minimum of 3 to 4 people, if you can bring them into a course, we will then come out or drive out to you as well to assist you with these courses. So as an Iopsa member, not only is this a training promotion for you at 650 Rand per person, including that free fire extinguisher, but actually you get an additional discount as an Iopsa member because Iopsa is sponsoring some of those cans and training from their side as well. So if you'd like to book that course, whether an Iopsa member or not, please book your course through info@ohss.co.za. And perhaps we can assist you then with your training going forward. So there you've got SHE-Rep as well as firefighting that you can start with straight away. And if you have any questions on the day of the training, or perhaps you have questions now, we've got 5 minutes to take them. Otherwise, we can also drop you an email with answers to your questions. Thank you again. We look forward to our Toolbox talks coming up for the rest of the month. Thank you very much, Jacques, and thank you to all our attendees this morning. We really look forward to seeing you next week for the employer's responsibilities and what are your responsibilities in terms of the OSH Act and the legislation. Keep yourself safe out there and COVID free.